People don't realize that women might get diagnosed with depression or high anxiety when they actually have ADHD. And then vice versa for men, they might get diagnosed with ADHD, but they're probably dealing with actually high anxiety or depression, or they have all of it. That's very common too, to have depression, anxiety, ADHD, but it's just so confusing. This is why I highly, whenever someone comes to me, they're like, oh, I haven't been diagnosed yet. I always tell them like, look, I care less about your diagnosis. I don't need to know your diagnosis. You know what I need to know? What's going on in your body makeup? It's out of balance in your biochemistry. Then I know how to fix your symptoms. There's this issue with the ADHD dopamine stuff. And so sometimes I'll have people go through what I call a dopamine reset, is where they need to get rid of a lot of the stimulating things in their life, even just for 7 days, like no social media, no TV, no video game. If there's porn issues, definitely none of that. Other stimulants, like as far as sugar, if you remove that just for 7 days, it's really powerful what happens. The first couple of days is going to be really boring. It just really will. But what happens is the brain is still going to seek something. And hopefully that energy targets back to your loved one. You eventually find that thing that you used to love and enjoy comes back.
Hey y'all, Josh Tomeoni with the Derelict Podcast. Welcome back. We're so glad you're here. Would you do me a favor? It will only take you a couple seconds. Whether you're listening or watching right now, will you head on over to YouTube and hit that subscribe button? It really helps us get this message to more and more people that we can help. Greatly appreciate all of you. Thank you so much for being here and enjoy the episode.
Welcome to the Derelict Podcast. For the disparaged, depleted, and delinquent souls trying to find our way, we're talking about the scary part of the journey, where we don't know how it'll end. Let's be free to face our fucking failures in real time as the most unadulterated, truest version of who we are. No sugarcoating. Welcome to the shit show, you derelict.
Hey, you derelicts. Welcome back to another episode of the Derelict Podcast. I am your host, Josh Tomeoni, and we have another special guest here today, Dr. LeGrand, who is king of YouTube. No, maybe not king of YouTube, but millions and millions of views on YouTube. Why does he have millions of views? Because of the fact that he works with entrepreneurs, specifically with ADHD. So if you have ADHD, like me, listen in, because we're going to have some really good stuff for you today. Some things that I've already learned from LeGrand that have helped me tremendously as well. So LeGrand, welcome. Thanks for being here, man.
Hey, Josh, thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here. And thanks for having me.
I appreciate you being on here. I appreciate being in the presence of YouTube greatness. One thing that I one day aspire to. So you've figured that algorithm out, or at least to a big degree. So that's awesome. That's awesome. And I think it's mainly because of the fact that you're producing this amazing content that really isn't getting talked about, I would say, probably in the way that you're talking about it.
Yeah.
Right. Like I've gone to, I have a naturopath who's very, very educated. He's a really, really great doctor. He really hasn't ever steered me wrong. I've been working with him for years. We've done really good things together. And at the same time, though, there's still a limit on what he can do, right? He doesn't really have that, maybe that kind of more coaching element that you are bringing into medicine, which I think is fascinating as a coach, because it seems like you're kind of combining the two. Is that a good way of saying it?
For sure. Because when it comes to ADHD, both are necessary. You got to change the body chemistry, which gets forgotten a lot. And so a lot of people with their ADHD, they'll either go through just doing therapy or just coaching, and then they're missing the whole component of change the biochemistry. But then sometimes they might just only be doing medication, trying to do the biochemistry stuff, and then they're missing the whole coaching part of it. So I think like both are needed, but also what's also usually missed is like a lot of people think it's just the brain that needs to be fixed, but it's like the whole body does. Like there's a lot of things that contribute to your ADHD and symptoms that make it worse.
Got it. So for everybody listening, mainly, we are going to talk about, obviously, ADHD and how to handle that, especially as an entrepreneur, that sort of thing. But what I really want to focus on as well, which we will come back to, is how men specifically deal with relationships with their ADHD. I know that's definitely something that I've struggled with in the past with every single one of my relationships I've ever had, romantic relationships especially. So we're going to talk a bit about that, and stay tuned because LeGrand has some really specific nuggets for you that you're not going to hear unless you actually just listen to the show. So it'll come later in the show. So you'll have to decide if this is important, how important it is to you. So that being said, Dr. LeGrand, maybe let's just start a little bit with your background so people know who they're listening to. Yeah. How did you end up getting in a space where you tried to bring, or you are successfully, I should say, bringing the medical side and the coaching side with ADHD? Like, do you have ADHD? Maybe start with that. Where did that come from? How did you decide, hey, there was a disconnect here with people and how they're receiving ADHD treatment?
Yeah, no, I do have ADHD and also dyslexia. And so growing up, my biggest challenges with ADHD and having dyslexia was the academic challenges. So, I had my challenges throughout school, through college, but what I was able to do is like find other doctors that understood it differently than like, here's the medication, because the medication helped me focus, but wasn't like consistent. I also didn't like how I felt on it, felt like a zombie. And so I was like, there's got to be a better way to this. And so I was lucky to find other doctors that were more holistic minded to help me changing my biochemistry, to helping with the symptoms I was experiencing. So it helped me get through college and then getting into medical school. And, there's still challenges while I was in medical school. Then all of a sudden, like all my problems were gone, but things start to improve as I worked and managed my own ADHD and was successfully to get through medical school. And through that, then of course, starting on my own practice, my own business, and be able to successfully be consistent with that and growing it to being a successful practice and business, virtual practice. And so like for me, like what got me into is obviously my own personal journey, right? So like going through all those challenges, especially through school, I didn't want to have to see others have to go through that. And I realized that was like my calling. It was something and I feel like a lot of doctors or health practitioners or people who are into health, a lot of times it is their own personal story that kind of gets them into the health journey because they were able to figure it out on their own. And so they are inspired to helping others. And that's what I was doing. Like I first thought I was going to go into cancer, because I worked with a lot of cancer patients, but I just resonated more of like my own experience. And I did a lot of extra rotations and rounds in ADHD while I was in medical school. So I just really resonated with those patients, clients I was working with. And so I'm like, okay, this is definitely something that I know I need to do. And I know it's missing because of my own personal experience and seeing all my other patients, clients of the same kind of experience that they were going through with that I was, is like, okay, if you ever get diagnosed with ADHD, it's just a simple assessment. You fill it out, questionnaire, and then you're diagnosed. You might have a few appointments, maybe one. I've heard people not even have really an appointment and get diagnosed. To me, that's not very thorough, like at all. And that's not just with ADHD. It's like a lot of with just mental health. It's because out of all the parts of the body, the brain is the one that's like the most mysterious and we don't know fully, but it doesn't mean we can't look at other things that could be contributing to it. So that was my approach because of the results I got. So I'm like, I need to teach this to the world that there's more to than just looking at an assessment and just doing medication and just doing therapy, that there's other parts of our body that are out of balance, like it was for me, that need to be rebalanced, but we have to discover what it is, because not one person is the same, not one ADHD person is the same. So it's really important to look at your unique issues. And we're going to talk about relationships, and that definitely contributes to the relationships, because if you haven't fixed the biochemistry, it's very hard to be present with the ones you love. Right. It's really difficult to do that. And, I had a lot of failed relationships until I fixed my issues. My relationships like only lasted for like a month. Maybe my most successful relationship before I got married was like 3 months until I actually fixed these things. And now I've been married for almost 10 years now. I'm on our 10 years. And so, but I had to fix my own ADHD because I was not present. Emotionless sometimes, really caring of the needs of the other person, or hyper focus on something else than that person. And so that can always cause a strife within a relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. You said so many good things, and I'm going to pick out a couple of things that I want to touch on real quick. And the first one is just going back to just getting diagnosed as ADHD. I remember, so I firmly believe I've been ADHD all my life, but I only got diagnosed a couple years ago, and I'm 40.
Yeah.
Right. So I just lived with it my entire life. Recently, after I got diagnosed, interestingly enough, my mom was like, oh, yeah, they always talked about that in school and said that you should get diagnosed. And, we just never went through it. I was like, awesome. Great. Glad that I could have done that when I was 10 and had a 30-year head start. Appreciate it, Mom.
Yeah.
But my point with all of that story is that I went to, an ADHD specialist, and it was interesting what I learned. Number one is there's no real way, from what I learned, and you correct me if I'm wrong, there's no real way of actually diagnosing ADHD. It's more of just like an assumption based on how you're answering questions and how you view and, is that?
Yeah, no, that's true.
accurate?
In fact, people don't realize this, that they've done surveys on this. About 40% are misdiagnosed.
Yeah, and I could see that. And she literally, the person that I was even meeting with, she's like, yeah, majority of the people that get sent my way do have ADHD. I'm like, well, do they? Or are you just looking for it? Like, are you a surgeon looking for something to cut? Are you an ADHD expert looking?
Or they're just not diagnosed, especially women will get diagnosed for something else. And I think that's actually 60% of like just mental health in general. 60% are just misdiagnosed in their mental health conditions. So someone that maybe a woman might get diagnosed with depression or high anxiety when they actually have ADHD. And then vice versa for men, they might get diagnosed with ADHD, but they're probably dealing with actually high anxiety or depression, or they have all of it. Like that's very common too, to have depression, anxiety, ADHD, and bipolar, like that could be thrown in the mix too. But it's so confusing. And to me, this is why whenever someone comes to me, they're like, oh, I haven't been diagnosed yet. I always tell them like, look, I care less about your diagnosis. I don't need to know your diagnosis. You know what I need to know? I need to know what's going on in your body makeup. Like what's out of balance in your biochemistry. Then I know how to fix your symptoms. But the diagnosis doesn't give me information. In fact, it can, in a way, blind doctors, because like they go and look at your assessment and they see in your chart, oh, he's got ADHD. And you're coming in with, let's say you're dealing with like, hey, I'm tired, because adults with ADHD tend to get this state of burnout. And it's like, I'm tired. It's like, oh, we just need to change your medication. We just need to increase the dose and then you're good. And they do that over and over again. And guess what possibly gets missed? You might have a thyroid issue. You might have a low iron situation for years that got overlooked. And yet how did they address it? Thinking it's all just here. And that's where I am definitely take a very unique approach, because it's looking at the whole body like every patient should be. But with some reason with mental health, doctors are so blindsided to think it's just within that realm.
Right. Yeah.
I'm not saying every doctor,
but that's how they're trained to.
Right.
See,
I'm not saying every doctor. I don't want to like throw a doctor on the bus. Like they're great what they do. It's just the training. Right. So it's like it's just the training. And so we've had this misconception that when it comes to mental health, is like that's just the go-to. But we forget like there is the whole body too. That it could be not just the mental health situation. It could be other things that just get missed. Now, it's also the system. Doctors don't have very much time with their patients. So they got to go off what they got. And then this is why patients get misdiagnosed all the time, mistreated all the time, different treatment the treatment they shouldn't be on. I mean, I've had patients where they were put on an antidepressant, then they had serotonin syndrome, which is really bad to be put through. You'll feel agitated, irritated, stressed, paranoia. You'll have all sorts of different things. Like it's just not a good situation, because there isn't the time to see what truly is really going on sometimes. And so that's why I realize it's such a missing piece when it comes to mental health, but especially with ADHD, that it needs to be looked at differently. Like who cares about the diagnosis? Like I honestly really don't think the diagnosis, I mean, sure, it can help with like when you're in school to get extra help and stuff like that. Like that's helpful. But as far as like treating it and not understanding the root cause, it doesn't really help us. At least doesn't help me to really understand what truly is going on.
Yeah, I relate to that for sure. I mean, I'll just share my story briefly. When I got diagnosed, first of all, it was not a surprise to me. Like I have all the symptoms I have for a long time. So this was not a surprise, but I get diagnosed with ADHD. Also not a surprise to any of my friends too. I'm like, hey, guess what? I got diagnosed. They're like, yeah, no shit. They already knew it, right? Because I have literally all the symptoms. So, but then, they put me on the first medication. I'll just call it the two main primary medications from what my understanding is. They put me on the first one, didn't work. Put me on the second one, actually caused a lot of issues. It increased my, I started having high blood pressure that I'd never had before. I started having issues with my heart. And at the end of the day, right after I got off the medication in a very stressful period of my life, I ended up having my one and only panic attack and ended up in the hospital. So it wasn't a good experience for me. And that's still with two professionals that are highly rated helping me with that. I mean, I have an ND who is very, very good at supplements and all these other things with my body. He's been very good for me. And then I have this ADHD specialist. And still, even within that, because of the, narrow focus, that's what ended up for me. And I haven't tried a medication since. I've just tried more on other things. So, but one thing that you mentioned that I want to come back to, that we actually talk about on this podcast a lot is, if you look at the mental side of your body, right? Or excuse me, your mental piece, the spiritual piece, the physical piece. It seems like whatever your gig is where you're focusing. Well, let me explain that for a second. We talk a lot on this podcast about men and men's issues specifically. The majority of what's out there for men is physical, right? Go on Instagram. You just got to lift more weights. You just got to get in the gym more. You got to get a six pack. You got to go for a run. It's always physical. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. But generally speaking, the guys that are preaching physical aren't preaching mental or spiritual. And then you have, like you said, the medical industry that's maybe all mental and not looking at the physical or the spiritual whatsoever. And then you have the spiritual side where we're talking about meditation or, you know, whatever religion you practice, all those sort of things, and maybe not looking at the physical and mental. So I think it's really fascinating that every single person I talk to on this podcast has one of those three, and that's kind of their primary focus. And what I hear from you is that this is a bigger symptom, ADHD. There's other things going on with you, and it's not just up here. It's not just down here. It's a combination of both of those. There's definitely spiritual aspects too. I'm sure.
Well, I'd say three. There's a third one in there.
ADHD that literally just need to meditate more.
Yeah. So I'd say there's definitely three. So I call it the triangle health, kind of like what you're talking about. There's the physical component, and then we talk about the mental and emotional and spiritual. I kind of put that in a component too. But the third one that I stress is chemical, the body chemistry. So like physical, when we think about physical, like there could be actual brain trauma. Like if you actually had a concussion, an accident, like we're talking about brain health or just any kind of health, like that's like the physical component, or doing exercise, like you were saying, like using men focus a lot on this. And like, that's what a lot of people target towards men is that, but never really the mental, emotional, and the spiritual, because that is really important, but also the biochemical. And why I call it the triangle of health is because all three need to be met. If one is not met, it's hard to excel in health and success and a lot of things that you want in life. And so you have to have all three met because, for example, if you have the physical and the spiritual, but the biochemicals all messed up, it's hard to excel in spiritual, right? So if you're like a religious person, if you're constantly in, health turmoil all the time, it's hard to be connected with God or connected with spiritually. But let's say you have the physical and the biochemical, but not the mental or the spiritual. It's hard to even enjoy life. It's hard to appreciate, have gratitude, have things. It's like, why even live sometimes? Like people can have all the health and have all the biochemical things, all like they're like healthy, they're doing the exercise, they're doing everything possible, but yet they're not happy. And that's because the mental, spiritual component is not met. All three are required. And that's something I work with our patients and clients, is that all three have to be met in order to really have true transformation in your life. Like if you really want transformation, it's just getting rid of symptoms. It's also about transformation. And that's why I think it's really important to address.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with you. Going back to kind of your story and why you started with this, having ADHD and just having your experience and being a doctor and that sort of thing. I was thinking about something that actually somebody said to me the other day, and they said, it sounds like you didn't choose your path. It sounds like your path chose you. So I wanted to say that to you because it really does seem like that. You can tell just the passion and the energy that you have in order to try to solve this problem that is a huge problem. I mean, the ADHD numbers just keep going up. And it almost seems, and again, I'm not in the medical field, so correct me if you think I'm wrong here, but it almost seems just like a lazy diagnosis. Like, well, you have ADHD, so we'll throw you on some medication and then not actually deal with anything.
Yeah, I would say, a good majority, you're right on the path, like a good majority that does happen that way. And also with mental health, like especially within genders too. And there's a problem with that, is for women, a lazy diagnosis, like you got depression, so take an antidepressant. Also, if you're tired, take an antidepressant. Like that is their answer. You can't sleep, take an antidepressant. Like literally that is like their answer all the time. I've had my mother-in-law go through this. I've had other relatives go through this. I've had, obviously lots of patients and clients go through this. And it goes back to the system and the training. So it's not necessarily the doctor's fault. It's the system of how they were trained, when it's like, okay, if someone comes in for chronic fatigue, and they don't have a thyroid issue, because that's usually would be their go-to is like, at least check thyroid. And if the thyroid's clear, by the way, they only will test like TSH. That's not enough to rule in or rule out a thyroid situation, but that's what we'll do because that's what they're trained. And then it's like, okay, that's not an issue. They might check for anemia, maybe, not always the case, but let's say they do, and they don't find anything there. Their go-to is going to be, okay, they just are depressed, and that's why they are tired. So let's give them an antidepressant. So in a way it is, it's kind of lazy, but it isn't necessarily, it's because the doctor's necessarily being lazy. It's just the training. And it definitely needs to be changed. And I think people are waking up. A lot of people are getting educated. We live in an educated world where you can find this information, and that's good. So now they're demanding on the doctors. So now the doctors are starting to do continuing education. They're starting to do holistic medicine. I'm seeing it all the time. I'm seeing a lot of MDs that are looking to do functional medicine and looking to do all these other things that naturopathic doctors like myself and like like old time osteopathic doctors or just more holistic minded doctors are doing, because it is what is required in order to give true transformation for somebody. Otherwise, all we're doing is just pretty much putting a Band-Aid on it, and hopefully that they're not going to die, but they're not living their optimal health that they need to be at their true potential that they could be at.
And we could have an entire other podcast on here, so I don't want to get a couple of ADHD guys distracted right now. But just to make a comment, you talked a little bit about the system, the model. So there's not only the system, the model that the doctors are, prescribed to, that then tells them how to respond in certain situations. 100% agree with you on that. And you see it even more than I do. But then there's also the insurance system. Just to add another layer of complexity.
If we want to add another layer, that's the reason why I don't work with insurance companies
for 10
anymore.
minutes max, right?
Yeah.
And have a car and some, like, just think, if you're not a doctor, just think about this for 1 second. In your job, is there ever a time where you have 10 minutes off during the day and your head is just in the wrong space? Now think about that. Now think about the fact that that's probably the average time you're going to see the doctor. What if he just happens to be having an off 10 minutes?
Well, exactly.
And you meet with him once a year. So you just got misdiagnosed for an entire year because of an off 10 minutes because he just got off the phone with his wife who was screaming at him for some reason, or some client that's like trying to sue him or whatever, right? Like, we all have those moments. So how are you going to be able to do that in 10 minutes? And then not only on top of that, again, another conversation for another day. Then you have our entire food system, especially in the United States, and all the just terrible things that we're putting in our body, and then trying to heal it with drugs that are terrible that we're putting in our body, right? It's just such a broken, terribly unhealthy system that how are you supposed to get out of that? So as let's turn towards talking about relationships now, because I know we want to dive into that and how ADHD affects that.
Yeah.
How does, let's see, I'm not even sure my question here. My question, I guess, is, what do you see most common? First of all, let's maybe start with that. What do you see most common with people, specifically guys, if you can, but just people in general,
we can focus on men.
ADHD in a relationship? Like, how does that manifest?
Yeah. So I'd say the biggest issue, with men that are in a relationship, whether that's they're married or just in a relationship, the biggest problem that I would say is just being present. And it's hard for someone that doesn't have a very well managed ADHD. So I never say I'm here to cure your ADHD, because it doesn't need to be cured. My ADHD is not cured. What I like to say is I like to optimize your ADHD brain to its true potential, what it can be. Because there's a lot of very successful people that have ADHD that have run multi-billion-dollar businesses. I can name them off, that have ADHD. But also there's other people that maybe aren't like a multi-millionaire or whatever, but have very successful relationships, very successful marriages, because they've learned to be able to manage it. And because us people with ADHD, we're a unique breed. So I'm just going to say that, like, we're very unique, but we are the movers and the shakers of this world, is what I always like to say. And we are required in order to disrupt the system, to move forward. You look at a lot of the successful people that have disrupted this world, I guarantee a lot of them probably had ADHD, even if they weren't diagnosed. So what I want to try to help your audience understand is to stop thinking that this ADHD is a disease or a disability or stuff like that. I get a lot of people have very severe ADHD symptoms, but it just needs to be managed because you've gone so long. And so therefore it's so bad that, there is things that I want you to think about like the body chemistry of how can we improve that so you can get back to your potential with your ADHD brain. So going back to kind of like the relationship. So like I said, if not being present, like that is probably the number one thing that I see an issue in relationship is that whenever I'm working with both, because I usually will always want to talk to the spouse and get to know their perspective on the issue. And usually the number one complaint is typically that they are not present. And, when he's home, they're not home. When, I'm trying to communicate with them, they're also not present. Or I told them something and went one ear out the other. And it's funny because I usually have to also help educate the spouse too on this, is like how our ADHD brains work. I've also had to educate my wife on this, is like, look, if I'm not looking at you directly and acknowledging what you've told me, it definitely will not process. Because how our brain works is we get distracted very easily, but also our brain can be very well at hyper focusing on something. And if someone's talking to us, there is nothing going in. It just isn't. And you probably experienced this as well.
I was actually just thinking about how, I don't think I've ever put this together, Dr. LeGrand, but I want to just tell you because something's clicking for me in my brain. And this happens to me often with my kids. And I have 3 kids that are all pretty young. They're 7, 10, 12. Yeah. And so there's always talking in my house when they're over here, right? Like there's always just something going on. And there's often times where like they're saying stuff and I'm totally focused right here. And then they maybe even think that I heard something and then they'll ask me later. They're like, well, I just told you that earlier. I was like, wait, when? Like it just didn't even register at all. It wasn't like I was trying to ignore them. I was just focused on whatever I was focused on.
And this thing has made it worse.
Oh, far worse.
Far worse for everybody, but especially for people with ADHD. So I think that's why we're seeing, there's a lot of reasons why we're seeing an increase of diagnoses, especially adults. That's the highest category we're seeing of is diagnosis in adults. With children, like it's increased a bit, but primarily, and that's because of the pandemic. When people came home, and I live at home for a long period of time, the spouse like got to know their spouse more and be around them more. And it's like, I think you might have ADHD. You should go get assessed. So that's why we saw that spike, and we're still seeing that continue because still there is a lot of people that still work at home even after the pandemic being over. So, this is something that like it takes time to educate, obviously, the significant other. Sometimes it's like, look, it's not like obviously being present can improve. But there's certain aspects of our ADHD brain that are still always going to be there. And instead of being mad that it's like that, acknowledge what it does and acknowledge what it's for and how you can use that to your advantage. So this whole thing that
So what's an example of that?
So example of that is, so just for anybody in your audience and for yourself included, and even for me, when I am not present, it doesn't mean I'm not present anywhere. I am present somewhere. But what is it that you're present to? So it could be mindless present. So just mindlessly scrolling through your phone and then someone's trying to talk to you. But what does it require to be more present to that individual? But like we could use that hyper focus. So it could be something you're working on. People with ADHD could be very good at this. They could spend hours on something that they're hyper-focused on and be very good at it. And that's why it's a great tool. But it also is a double-edged sword. Because when we are stuck on the phone, so it's something that might be mindless, being present on something, is we have to acknowledge and also educating the people that we love. It's like, look, if I'm on my phone, there is no way you're going to get through me unless I put my phone down. I'm looking you into the eyes. It takes time to educate people on this. And, my wife has learned this over time because I've told her, like, because she'll still sometimes like, I told you this. I'm like, was I on my phone? Was I looking you in the eyes? If I wasn't, it didn't process. And she's like, you're right. So when you have those kind of conversations, so like if you're struggling in your relationships, like that is a first good step to working towards.
So that's a very practical step, right? Just telling your partner, your spouse, etc. Like, look, here's the thing that's really, really important is that if I'm looking at you face to face, then I'm receiving the information. If I'm not, I'm probably somewhere else and I'm probably not going to hear you.
Exactly. And there's this I call it the autopilot mode that us ADHD people will do. Us, men especially, is the yeah. Like we'll say, yeah. That's autopilot. That's like the other part of our brain that's just like, it's like a reaction response, but we didn't process nothing. at all because I wasn't looking directly at you and I was probably doing something else. So it doesn't have to be a phone. If I'm like, I don't know, working on something, doing a chore or something, I actually have to stop and look at it. Here's the thing.
So yeah. Ladies, listen real quick. Okay. So here's the deal. Guys, listen as well. When a woman says, I'm fine, what does it mean? It means they're not fine.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So guys, if you're listening to this or watching this, if you think that a woman says, I'm fine, they're fine, that is not correct. Every single time they say I'm fine, they are not fine 100% of the time. Ladies, same thing that Dr. LeGrand just said. If we say something like, okay, yep, got it, etc., that means that we're not paying attention 100% of the time.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Because it, like you said, it's an auto response where I'm not sure why women say I'm fine. Hey, look, women, if you're listening, watching this, write in the comments below why you say I'm fine. Like, what does that mean for you? Why do you say it if you're not actually fine? I'm really curious about that now. I'm really hoping I get some comments, or DM me if you're listening to this on Spotify or something. But for men, I know, at least for me, I can only speak for myself. When I'm engaged in something, I'm like, okay, it's like I'm almost actively trying to block it, but I don't want to just aggressively block it.
Yep.
So I don't want to be rude.
Yep.
And it feels rude to me to just turn and say, can you shut the fuck up? Right? Like that feels rude to me, even though, however, I bet my romantic partner would appreciate that more in a certain circumstance, as long as I didn't say it like rudely, like I just said it. But if I just looked at him and say, hey, look, I'm sorry, I'm really trying to concentrate and focus on this right now. Can you give me a second? I think they'd appreciate more than maybe like, oh, okay, and then never hearing anything. And then it shows up a month later and they're like, oh yeah, I remember the thing I told you a month ago that was really important that you're supposed to be doing tomorrow. You said you were going to do it.
Yep. So here's a good example within my own relationship that I'll give that we worked out in. So my wife will say, hey, can you do this? I'm like, yeah, I could do that. And this also comes to communication. So communication is so key within relationships, especially with ADHD. Is like, I think that's what also has relationships crumble, then it could lead into divorce, is because there's lack of communication and lack of like telling your partner like how you think. I know it's difficult to try to explain, but also what they're thinking too. So a classic example that I got, like I was just saying, is like my wife will say like, hey, can you do this? And, my auto response is like, and I'll acknowledge it. Like, yeah, I could do that. Like, I'll do that. And for a long time, and then my ADHD brain, I would forget. And then at the end of the day, it's like, did you do that thing? It's like, or, oh no, I didn't. So my wife, she finally, with communication said like, when I tell you that means I want it done now. See, I didn't know this for a while. So, because she's like, I'd rather you tell me no. So this is really important for you women, like to explain, just like, Josh was saying, like, why do you say when you're fine? So my wife would tell me, she finally told me, she's like, when I say I want you to do something, I mean now. If you can't do it now, I'm okay if you just tell me, no, I can't do that. So I've learned this. And so there'll be times. So I've gotten better. It's actually better. This is why it's better to sometimes say no. It will actually help with the relationship because you're being truthfully honest and start trying to appease the other person.
100%.
It's like so sometimes I will tell my wife because I am really busy. I'm like, no, I can't do that right now. So that's like my response. If I really can't do that right now, but then if I feel like I can, I'll be like, okay, I'll stop what I'm doing and I just go and quickly do it. So am I perfect at it? No, there's still sometimes the out response because I am actually not paying attention, but it's definitely improved significantly with our relationship because there's the communication part of it. Like that's really key.
Yeah. And just a message real quick too, if you're listening to this and you are on more like the shy side of things, or maybe you don't want to be aggressive, or you're really concerned, you're more passive, or maybe you're codependent, or maybe you struggle with codependency in the past and you just want people to be okay. You want your partner to be okay, etc. I'm speaking to you right now because that used to be me. And I still have aspects of that, but I've grown from it a lot. But here's what I'm trying to say to you real quick. In that modality, sometimes it's even harder to say something like no, right? Because I don't want to offend somebody. I don't want to upset somebody. I want people to be okay. I don't want to, have to be aggressive with them, etc. Here's the thing I've learned in my own life, and I've learned with the men that I coach. And that is, a woman, especially a strong woman who knows who they are, I don't necessarily mean strong as in physical strength or that they have masculine tendencies. I don't mean anything like that. Yeah. I just mean a woman that's actually living out their true femininity, living out their authentic self. A healthy woman, from my experience, always wants truth over what you think might make them feel better.
Mm-hmm.
They're very, obviously, women are very emotional, just like men are very emotional, just different emotions that we all experience. But what I've learned in the last several relationships I've had is that the women that I've been with actually really appreciate it if I can just be straightforward to them and be honest about whether I'm able to do this or not. And I'm going to go so far as to say, especially with my last long-term relationship, she thought it was incredibly sexy when I did it too.
Mm-hmm.
Like to have opinions and to actually just be like, no, this is my presence. This is what I'm bringing into the room. And I can do this or I can't do this. Or like you said, to specify, like when you ask me if I can do this, when do you want this done by? And another thing that I've helped just with a really quick communication piece that's been helpful for me is when you're asking somebody if they'll do something, have them repeat back to you what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds a little elementary, but let me just give you an example. I was on a call with a client right before we, started recording this.
Mm-hmm.
And I still have the habit sometimes of explaining something and then saying, does that make sense? When you say, does that make sense? People usually feel shameful to say no because it makes them feel dumb. So instead of, does that make sense? Something like, is there anything else I can explain about that? How did I do explaining that? Can you repeat back to me what you heard from that and what you got out of that just to make sure we're on the same page? This works in relationships as well. So instead of just like, hey, can you do this now? Yes, I can. Well, test them a little bit. Okay, just so I understand, what did you hear me ask you to do and when can you do it? And then it doesn't have to, you got to be careful with tone here because you can sound like, how do I say this? Especially women can sound naggy when they do this. Like, we're not talking about that.
Yeah.
We're talking about just repeating and making sure that you're hearing that. So keep going. You have a lot of good stuff to say.
I agree. Like, I think it's, it does require like how you phrase questions, how you say them, and because you're going to get a different response. And of course, tonality is a huge one too. Body language. I mean, there's a whole another podcast we go just on those things there. But I do want to say this is that, like this whole, like this auto response, like this also happens with people who don't have ADHD. The thing is with people with ADHD is just heightened 10 times. So that's why I kind of wanted to say is like, there is that understanding, but because it's heightened 10 times, it means we're heightened 10 times on when we use it for good use. And that's where we can use it a lot to our advantage. And it just helps us to be we need to be a lot more self-aware. It also means we have to be 10 times extra in our health. I stress this a lot is that, it's a double-edged sword is that we have these challenges, but because of that, and there's a lot of things that we're more prone to. We're more prone to dementia and Alzheimer's disease, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease. The list goes on. And because of knowing that information, for me, it's like I always have to be on top of it with my health, but that also benefits me because I'll live a longer life. If I'm definitely managing my things, I will be able to excel more in life. And so that's the thing is like, there is like this huge gap with people with ADHD. If you take all the people in the world with ADHD that, and there's a lot of people that are not diagnosed, but if you took the ones that were also not diagnosed and you will see probably a huge gap of like the very ultra successful and the ultra not. And what is the difference between the two? They have figured out how to manage it. And that's really the big difference. Like they figured out how to manage it. They've also understand that there's certain things that they do or they eat or take that makes things worse, or when they don't exercise or when they don't do certain lifestyle important things, that it makes it worse. So they stay far clear from that.
Yeah,
so
I was actually going to ask you about that because I know, my ADHD and my body chemistry presents in a way where, like you said earlier, I can have, let's say, a focus day where I crush a month of work and then nothing the next 3 days. Just super unproductive. Like I'm either super productive or super unproductive a lot of the time, or at least more historically. I've learned how to manage this a bit. But I'm just curious for anybody listening that relates to that either gets really productive, really unproductive. What are some kind of practical things that they can do or practices that they can do to help with that?
Yeah. So this still goes back to the first and foremost basic thing that I always like to address is if there's inconsistency, which is so common with people with ADHD, is they'll have a really productive day. And then, like you said, like 3 or 4 days of not productive. It's just very inconsistent. And it can be also inconsistent when someone takes medication too, because the medication doesn't always last the entire day. So there's also inconsistency with that. What's happening is there's something lacking in the body chemistry that's not allowing the consistency. So this could be hormone related. It could be different neurotransmitters that are off, that are not necessarily dopamine. It could be serotonin, GABA, all sorts of different neurotransmitters that could be off. It could be a nutritional deficiency that is causing this. It's also probably could be inconsistency with how you eat. So not necessarily always the food you're eating, but how frequent. A lot of people with ADHD, they'll like forget to eat. And then there's an inconsistency there. Also sleep. People with ADHD might have inconsistent sleep cycles. They might have a couple days of good quality sleep and then 3 days of not good quality sleep. Also, exercise could be inconsistent. So there's a lot of inconsistency, but when you can get dialed in, when it is consistency, you will find that your focus productivity will be consistent.
So it sounds like the consistency and the habits are really high.
Consistent habits. And so a lot of people will like, well, I can't get my I can't get consistent good sleep, or I can't get consistent exercise because I don't have the energy. So then that's why we got to go back to the body chemistry and see, okay, why aren't you have the energy to even just exercise? Let's fix that first. Maybe your cortisol levels are so low that you can't even get up in the morning. So now we got to fix that through different supplementation, lifestyle changes, nutrition, and stuff like that to just get that going. And then when you can have some improved energy, then you can be consistent with exercise. And then when you're consistent with the exercise, then you starting developing good habits with sleep. So then you can also improve energy. So like there's like, they all are important.
Yeah. I want to go back to something you said earlier too. And I want to say it so you don't have to say it because you're going to say it and people are like, oh, he's the doctor. Of course he's going to say it. Here's what I'm going to say. And that is when I started working with a doctor that I work with now, again, the one I've had a good experience with, when I go in for a blood test, there's 9 or 10 vials of blood that are getting taken. And here's the reason I'm mentioning that. What I'm mentioning that is that every single time I go in, the person taking my blood is always like, wow, this is a lot. What that tells me is that most doctors are sending people in for a blood test are not testing for anywhere near the amount of things that they need to be testing for. Mm-hmm. You mentioned this earlier when it was related to, I think, to thyroid is what you were talking about, how they only test one aspect of thyroid.
Yep.
Or it's like, you know, any of these companies, I won't name them by name, but any of these companies out there right now that are advertising all the time for all these different things that you could test for, like testosterone is a big one for guys. Mm-hmm. Obviously, I'm a middle-aged guy, so of course I'm going to get testosterone ads all the time. But the ones that they're testing for testosterone, I've seen what they actually test for compared to my testosterone that I test for with my doctor. Mm-hmm. And they're not testing all the different aspects of testosterone. I'm not a medical guy, so I can't remember which ones, but they're not testing all of them. And if you don't test all of them, you're not going to see a complete picture, right? Yeah. I'm sure I'm speaking your language right now, but I'm saying it as a non-doctor, that knowing that once I started getting more of those levels and then worked with my doctor for supplements in order for those levels, that's when I really saw improvement.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're basically just explaining like, you know, if you were to look at your problems are all this big, and then your doctor's just going in testing just the few tests that they've been trained on. And guess what? You know why it's that way? It's what we call standard labs. Standard labs are put in place, guess what, by the insurance companies of what they think needs to put, because to keeping you alive, which is good. That's why we call it insurance. Insurance is to make sure you don't die. But when it comes to prevention, optimal health, that's not in their cards. So that's why they only have specific standard labs that insurance will cover to making sure you don't die. But if you want improved focus, energy, happiness, no more stress, that stuff like that, those types of tests are going to be missed. And that's just how it is.
I just had a weird analogy, and bear with me for a second while I say it, because it just clicked with me when you were talking about this. Your relationship to what you're saying, insurance is so that you don't die, right? And then you get something to make sure that you're actually thriving. You and I just realized on the mental side that relates to that, Therapy is the same. So I'm going to speak to people that go to therapy for a second. There's nothing wrong with therapy. I went to therapy for years.
I'm for therapy as well. Yeah.
But here's what therapy is. Therapy is to make sure you don't die. Therapy is to deal with your childhood trauma that you haven't gotten past yet. That's what therapy is for. But what a lot of people don't realize about therapy is it doesn't help you live a productive, amazing life moving forward. That's what coaching's for. So I just realized as you were having that conversation that the same thing is true. There's therapy where a lot of people stop because it's a lot easier, frankly, just to look at like my past problems and kind of boo-hoo and talk to my therapist about it than it is to actually move forward with the next level I want to get to in my life, which is what coaching's for. Right.
Well,
and I think that's what you're providing.
You hit the nail on the head right there is therapy is good, but like you said, it's to make sure you don't die, you don't commit suicide or like go on a complete spiral depression. Like therapy is good, but like as anybody that's ever done therapy, it isn't to give you action steps to moving forward of transformation. That is what coaching is for. Coaching is
that's why you'll meet people that have been in therapy for 30 years.
Yeah,
and they're still dealing with the same stuff, right?
Exactly. But they haven't necessarily gotten per se worse or gone to heaven forbid, like, to a moment of complete depression to want to be suicidal. Like that's what therapy is. It's a great prevention from allowing that happen. But like, as far as transformation, that's going to require someone like holding you accountable, but a therapist that's not their job. Job is not to hold. I mean, they'll try to hold accountable, but I've gone through a lot of therapy training and, in medical school, I did rotations and rounds in therapy. And like they always taught us is you're trying to just listen to the person and help them come to some kind of conclusion on their own. A coach is pretty much going to tell you what to do and what you need to do and hold you accountable to it, because they know it will help with the transformation and they're going to push you where it's going to be uncomfortable. That's what I do too. It's like whenever I enroll someone, I'm like, hey, look, this isn't a quick fix. And I'm like, here's the pill. And I gave you the magic supplement stack, which I give supplement stacks, but I'm like, that's just the starting point. Like there's a lot of things you got to change in your lifestyle that I'm going to push you and change. That's going to be uncomfortable for a bit, but guess what? That's what's required for transformation if you want this true life that you want with your ADHD brain.
I think what you just said is really, really key. It hit me hard. And that is the difference between prevention and transformation. Mm-hmm. And I see that with what you're doing as well. So there's the prevention side of the medical piece where you have to diagnose somebody with whatever it is. And you got to do some things, like if their heart's going to stop tomorrow, you got to do something to prevent that, right?
Exactly.
Prevention is really, really important. But I guess what I would ask all the listeners
So there's two different preventions too. I don't want to clarify on that because I did say that. So prevention to not die. There's also prevention of not getting the disease. So the insurance companies don't prevent from you getting the disease. They just prevent that once you have the disease to not die. So there is two types of prevention as well in the medical models.
So that's interesting. Yeah. So you have very base prevention, don't die. Then you have prevention of
don't get the condition, don't get the chronic illnesses. Right. Exactly.
And then you have transformation of like, well, what if we just jump up to the transformation piece, we just start transforming, and then we don't have to worry about this mid-level prevention because it's not going to happen.
Right. Exactly.
If we're transforming. So on that note, and I know we want to get to one other thing here probably before we end, but if somebody's wanting to take that transformative journey, before we end here, how do they get a hold of you? What's the best way?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm on all social platforms. I'm on Instagram. It's Dr. LeGrand spelled out like DOCTOR, and LeGrand spelled LEGRAND, as you can see right here. I'm on Instagram, obviously YouTube. My YouTube channel is just called also Dr. LeGrand. But yeah, if you just message me, follow me on Instagram and just message me, just Josh ADHD guide. I do have a guide that kind of helps with like the starting process of like the labs to kind of start going on. And then also the different supplementation, different nutrition to implement. And then we can have a conversation there to see if it makes sense. I usually will do initial consultation with people if you're wanting to further help. As long as you're an adult or an entrepreneur with ADHD, like that's what we specialize. Now, like I said before, you don't have to have the diagnosis. If you have issues with focus, productivity, memory issues, and you're trying to excel more in your business or just excel in life more because those things are hindering you, then just reach out to me on Instagram. Again, just put Josh ADHD guide, and then I'll send you that guide, and then we can have a conversation there on Instagram.
Awesome. It'll be in the show notes as well. We'll put a link to Dr. LeGrand's Instagram and his YouTube with the reminder to send Josh ADHD guide. We appreciate you doing that for the listeners.
Yeah, for sure.
Dr. LeGrand.
Yeah.
So as we're finishing up, I know one of the things we talked about is relationship issues. We went over a lot of different relationship issues, et cetera. The one thing that I don't think we really did cover, and that's really top of mind for me, because I help a lot of men going through divorce and big relationship changes. And I guess that's kind of where I want to land the plane here is, why do you think maybe ADHD is more prominent with men, and then specifically, or maybe it's not, maybe I misspoke. And then specifically, how is it leading to so much divorce? Like what can men do, again, not only as a preventative measure, but also transformative? Because I know for myself, my own story is after I went through my divorce, that was actually really a transformative journey for me to start looking at all these things and actually gaining understanding. I didn't get ADHD diagnosed until afterwards. I didn't start working with this doctor until afterwards. I didn't start going to therapy or getting a coach or any of this stuff until my divorce happened. So I guess maybe twofold. Why do you think it's causing so much of this? And then for the people on the other side or that are going through it, what should they think about as far as transforming their journey?
Yeah, no, for sure. I'm glad to ask the question. I mean, as far as just like the kind of the first questions is, is it truly like obviously an issue with men? It is primarily more men than women. We are seeing an increase with women. It's just because men and women present their ADHD differently. And that's why women don't tend to get diagnosed often. They're starting to catch that more. But as far as like, why does it lead more into divorce? It's kind of like what I was kind of saying at the beginning is being present. And communication's a really big issue. But I'd say what I have seen and when I'm also trying to prevent divorce. So when I have a couple that want me to work with their husband on this, and we're able to prevent that because we're working on helping with them being present. Like I would say that's like the number one thing that would solve the issue. It's hard for the individual that has the ADHD having all these different symptoms because there's a lot of distractions. So what we have to work on is obviously, yes, changing the body chemistry so they can improve on that, but that's still not quite enough. There's still habits we have to understand and identifying what are the distractions in your life that are not allowing to give attention to your spouse. And here's the other thing. Some people fall out of love. It happens all the time. They fall out of love because there's this issue with the ADHD dopamine stuff, not having enough. And so sometimes I'll have people go through what I call a dopamine reset, is where they need to get rid of a lot of the stimulating things in their life, even just for 7 days, like no social media, no TV, no video games. No, I mean, if there's porn issues, definitely none of that. If there's other stimulants, like as far as sugar and any kind of thing that's stimulating, if you remove that just for 7 days, it's really powerful what happens. The first couple of days is going to be really boring. It just really will. But what happens is the brain is still going to seek something. And hopefully that energy targets back to your spouse, your loved one. And guess what happens? You eventually find that you rekindle and find that thing that you used to love and enjoy comes back. It might not be the relationship. It could be maybe there was a hobby that you used to love and enjoy, but you found out of love out of it. And why does that happen? Because we live in this world where we are constantly on social media, like an instant gratification. And that instant gratification doesn't become so gratifying. So here's the thing you got to understand about dopamine. So the dopamine kick is actually the anticipation. It's not what you're doing during the exciting thing that you want. It's the anticipation of it. That's when the dopamine kicks. Is there? I want to watch this TV show, and you're thinking about it day, and you're excited about it. And guess what? You're like hurrying up with your work, and you're trying to get it done. That is where the dopamine's already kicking in. It's the anticipation. So what happens when you're binge watching and you have all this instant gratification? The dopamine kick is not really there anymore. You start losing even enjoyment in video games. I've seen that all the time too. Like, someone who loved video games, then they lost passion for it. You used to love the relationship you're with, because guess what? When you're in a new relationship, it's always exciting, right? It's all new and exciting and anticipation, and you're also away from each other. And so you don't get to see them until the weekend, so there's all this anticipation. And then you get married, you're with them all the time. But there's also all these other things that are giving your attention of getting that dopamine kick. So when you take a break from that and remove all of that, you start finding, again, your brain will reconnect and enjoy those things that you used to love. And hopefully that's your spouse. So that's what I tell. Like, that's like one thing you could do instantly that I will do with my patients and clients to like get a quick win is to refire the things that you used to enjoy and love. And it's tough. I've done it a few times, removing all those things out of my life for at least 7 days. And then what you could do is like once a week, just reset it once a week. One day out of the week, you decide, okay, no social media, no TV, none of this. I am going to designate being with my family or being with my kids, being with my spouse. We're going to go hiking. We're going to go enjoy other things. Guess what? That's also how my wife and I found new things that we liked together. One of them was actually we rekindled going out in nature. And now it's something that we do all the time. But I would have not rekindled that unless I did that exercise.
That's huge. That's huge.
And hopefully that's a huge win for your audience.
Yeah, no, I definitely encourage you to do it. That. And
you can also watch my video on it. I actually have a video. It's called this. People on YouTube, they call it the dopamine detox. I don't like calling it dopamine detox, but that's why I titled it, because that was what was trending. I call it a dopamine reset because you don't need to detox your dopamine because you need dopamine. But if you go on my YouTube channel, I did like 3 years ago or something like that. But you can find how I did it and my experience with it. So
I love that.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Yeah. And I've definitely done things like this in the past as well. And from my experience, it's similar to withdrawing from an addictive substance. You know, you can go through withdrawal, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's important for the audience to know, like, you will go through withdrawal, especially if you're highly addicted to this and you're really used to it, because going through a social media withdrawal or going through another addictive withdrawal can actually feel very similar to a drug withdrawal. Like you can have similar body things that happen. It's like somebody who, tries to detox from coffee or anything that you're addicted to, that you're having a lot of sugar, et cetera. Right. So from my experience, or relationships, by the way, you can have withdrawal from that as well. And from my experience, it can be really painful and difficult while you're going through it. And it's always been worth it. Every single time I've come out of it clearer, with a brighter mind, with just a better understanding of what I'm trying to do, what my mission is, my vision, my purpose, et cetera. So I definitely recommend that hugely to everybody listening to that. So I appreciate that. And also it's 7 days, man. Like you can't do 7 days. Like anybody can do 7 days of anything.
You got to go through some pain if you want transformation. That's just always going to be true.
It is, but it's 7 days of
nothing
pain,
good
man.
is
It's not
easy.
like years, not 7
nothing
years.
Good that, nothing that's great is going to be easy. If it's easy, then it's not going to cause the transformation that you want. So
agreed.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. LeGrand, thanks so much for being on. I really appreciate
thank you so much
it.
for
I
having
appreciate
me.
you talking. Yeah, this is great. I appreciate you talking so much about the ADHD, how that's affecting relationships. Again, it affects me in my own life, dealing with ADHD as well. And I also will say, just again, for everybody listening that does feel like they have some of these symptoms, maybe it's diagnosed, maybe it's undiagnosed, is that I also do see it as a superpower. So just like with everything else in life, you guys, where you focus your mind and where your energy goes, that's what impacts your life. So are you going to put your mind and your energy towards the fact that this is actually a superpower that you have? Or are you going to put your mind and your energy towards the fact that this is a hindrance, a disability, and something that is hurting you? Because either one is going to be true. You can script your own reality as far as this goes. So I would encourage you, if you feel this way, see it as a superpower. I try to. On my best days, I see it as a superpower. On my worst days, I see it as a disability. So I get it. It's never 100% one, 0% the other. But that being said, we got to wrap up. Appreciate you being here, Dr. LeGrand.
Yeah. No, Josh, thanks for having me, for sure.
Again, connect with him on Instagram and YouTube. His stuff is in the show
Dr.
notes.
LeGrand. Mm-hmm.
And most importantly, if you can, please like the episode. If you liked what Dr. LeGrand had to say today, please subscribe. This helps us get this information out to more people, and go do the same thing for Dr. LeGrand's videos if you like his content as well. Yeah. Again, thank you very much. And until next time, we'll see you later, you derelicts.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Thanks.